Hey everybody, I'm Andrew from the Flutter team, and in the next few minutes, I'm going to show you how using Flutter's material design widgets can help you quickly break down a design and turn it into real code that runs on both iOS and Android. Google recently released a bunch of new stuff for the material design system to help app developers build beautiful, usable experiences fast. With that came a ton of open source code that developers can use to implement those experiences. There are native libraries for iOS and Android, web components, and for Flutter, a whole bunch of widgets. Expanding panels, buttons, implicit animations, all kinds of stuff that you can use to quickly build your own native apps. How does that affect you? Well, imagine you're an engineer and your company's lead designer comes to you and says, "Hey, you know how we were looking for a project to get started with Flutter? Turns out the animal shelter down the road could use an app, so I mocked up a kitten adoption catalog. How quickly can you get these two designs turned into something we can actually see on Android and iOS?" Well, no problem. The first place to head is Flutter's Material Components Gallery. Here, you can find the widgets that'll be the building blocks of your interface. There's Scaffold, for instance, which provides a visual framework for your app with room for drawers and floating action buttons and menus. There are also dialogues, alerts, input elements for capturing data, and a lot more. With those widgets in your tool belt, you can begin thinking of the design in terms of how it's actually going to be constructed. The first screen becomes a scaffold with a list view, and the second becomes a simple dialogue with a networked image, some text widgets, and a couple buttons. A lot of times, this is when you, the engineer, would have to go write up a design doc and show what your plan is and then haggle over the details with the designer. But Flutter's built to make app coding quick, and in less time than it would probably take you to produce that doc, you can just knock out the code and have something real for people to look at. So let's do it. Let's get into an editor and start putting components together. Okay, here we are in a very basic Flutter app, about 20 lines of Dart code. First step to mocking up is mock data, so I'm going to use the magic of cut and paste to add a class to hold my kitten data. There's nothing fancy here, just 4 properties: name, age, description, and a URL for a kitten pic. And now for some data. Because iOS simulators and Android emulators use different addresses to represent the actual machine they're running on, I'm going to add a global string for it. And then I'll create a list of kitten objects with image URLs that work on either platform. There we go. 4 cats, easy peasy. For the images themselves, I've got them in a folder, and I'm just going to run Python's simple HTTP server. So for all my app nodes, these images could be coming from any server on the net. Okay, with the data in place, it's time to start building out the UI. Here's my home page, which is just an empty container right now. And I'm going to replace it with a scaffold, which provides some visual structure for everything else. And it has an app bar property I can use to put a title bar in my app. Available cats. Let's do kittens. All right, so when I save this and do a hot reload, I get this. It's a start, and it's running on both an iOS simulator and Android. If you haven't seen Hot Reload in action, Flutter can quickly deploy code changes to your app while it's still running. So I'm going to be making small incremental changes and then flipping back to these instances of the app a lot over the next few minutes. All right, let's add a body to the scaffold. This is where the list view comes in. I'll use the named builder constructor, which takes 3 parameters. First is item count, which is just the length of my list. There we go. Then comes item extent, the height of each item. And I'll just go with 60. And last is the builder. This is the method that's responsible for building the widgets that'll display each item. And I'm just going to make up a name and give it a function here. I'll define that method up here. It returns a widget and takes a build context. And that build context just represents a spot in the hierarchy where these widgets will be placed. And it takes the index of the item as well. And let's start with just a text widget for the kitten's name. There we go. And hot reload. All right, we got some names, but they're pretty small. I can use a text style to fix that though. One of the material components for Flutter is theme. Every app starts with a default theme, and I'll be customizing it later. This code gets a reference to the theme object for the correct context, and then styles the text widget to match the headline font. This something of context pattern, by the way, pops up a lot in Flutter. This is how you get the navigator to push routes, for example, and you can even get a reference to the containing scaffold that way. All right, hot reload. And we got big names. They're still locked on the left edge though, so I'll wrap the text widgets in a container and set some padding here. I think 16 should do it. There we go, container. And I'll set the padding property with a constant of 16. Once I've got that done, I just need to add an alignment here. There we go. And I'll use center left. That gives me vertical centering and left alignment. All right, another hot reload. And there we go. One last thing to do. Our app is blue, but the design was purple. So let me scroll up. Material app, which is the widget that represents my entire app, has an optional theme parameter in its constructor. I can give it some theme data that'll be merged into that default theme. So I'll set the primary swatch to purple. There we go. And one more hot reload. And I've got purple. My first design is implemented. All right, so that's one screen down. Now let's get the rest of the design working. I'm going to launch a simple dialog with some text, image, and button widgets that display details for an individual kitten. That's probably not a sentence you hear every day. Let's get to it. First order of business, I need to launch the dialog in response to a tap, so I need a gesture detector. There we go. I can use its onTap property to get myself wired up. So no parameters needed. I'm just going to call showDialog, which is a top-level Flutter method that takes a context and a builder function that's responsible for creating the widgets that compose the dialog. Just like with the ListView.builder, I'm going to give it a name, Dialog Builder. And then I'm going to define that function up here. It returns a widget, and it accepts a build context and a kitten. I'm just going to have it return a container to start so we can see what this dialog actually looks like. There we go. I'll give it a width and a height, say 80 of each. It's just going to be a big blank box. Okay, hot reload. And let me tap on mittens here on both sides. And I got empty dialogues. Cool. All right, so let's replace the container with something real. I'll start with a kitten image. I can use the image class, there we go, which has a named constructor for network loaded images. And I'm just going to give it the URL, which comes straight out of that mock object. And I'll give it a fit of fill. There we go. So it's a full bleed display. Format that up and hot reload. Hey, Mittens the Majestic. All right. And let me try one of the other cats. Steve here, he's pretty cool. Excellent. Okay, so that image is full bleed, but my text widgets and buttons should have some padding around them. So I'll use a padding widget. There we go. And another 16. And inside, I'm going to use a column widget, which can display the instances of text vertically. There we go. Format that up and hot reload. And so there's my padded empty column at the bottom. And speaking of padding, that space above the image is still there, and I need to take it out. That's not part of the design. Fortunately, I can set the content padding on the dialog itself to 0. There's actually a constant for it. So edge insets.0. And there we go. Okay, time for some text widgets. There's the name, the age, and description. There's one. Get another one for age in here, and then description. Now, age is an integer, so I'll use Dart's string interpolation to convert that to a nice string. Hot reload, and there's my text. But it is unstyled and unaligned, so we got some more work to do. Alignment is easy. Rows and columns have an alignment for their cross-axis. They got a property for that. The main axis for a column, of course, is vertical, so cross-axis alignment controls how things are set on the horizontal axis. I've got this set to stretch. So reload, and everything's there. Cool. So I need some sizes on these, and that means a theme object. I'm going to use it a few times in here, so I'm actually going to cache a local copy up at the top. There we go. Now I can come down and, let's say, display 1 for this one, which is a really big font size. There we go. Scroll down. And hot reload. There's Steve. Okay. And I'm going to knock out the rest of these pretty quick. I'll use subhead for the age. That's a good one. And the copy with method allows me to modify the theme instance, sort of like I did with the purple color earlier. So I'm going to make that italic. And I'm also going to use a widget called sized box here to just block out some space between the age and the description. With that done, I can set the description to use the style for body text. There we go. Body 1. Get that formatted up. All right, and hot reload. There we go. All right, now I just need some buttons. First, I'll use a wrap widget, which is like a row, but will wrap its children if they extend too far. There we go. Then I can use a flat button for the first choice, which is sort of like the cancel button. Let me get that in there. And I'll put I'm allergic, because why else would you not want a kitten in your life? And for the default action, I'll use a raised button. And that one's going to say adopt. And you'll note I'm just giving these empty methods for their onPress properties. That way they're enabled, but they're not going to actually do anything. Okay, cool. So I've got some buttons. They're not aligned right, though, and the colors are off. Alignment's easy. I can fix that by putting the wrap widget in an align widget, and then setting its alignment property to center right. And I'm also going to use another sized box to get some space in between the buttons and the description text. And while I'm in here, let me actually use the navigator to dismiss the dialog when that first button is clicked, the I'm allergic button. This is another one of those something of context methods like I mentioned before. There we go. All right, my buttons are in the right spot, and clicking dismisses the dialog properly. Let's get Scooter up here. All right, at this point, I just need to change the styling of my buttons and I'm pretty much done. So I'll come back up to the theme for my app and I'll set the button text theme to primary, which will be white text. Here we go. And then I can set the button color itself to purple as well. All right, one last hot reload gets me a finished implementation. I've got all the elements in place and everything is styled just like it should be to match the design. All right, after having spent just a short time coding, you can now go back to that designer, hand them builds of the app for Android and iOS, and get feedback based on actual code running on device. That's one of the goals that Flutter is designed for, getting from idea to app as quickly as possible. That's it for today, but if you'd like to learn more about Flutter, we got links to guides, sample apps, and a bunch of other resources in the description for this video. So check those out and head to flutter.io to get started.